Our kids were very active, 2 boys, 2 girls, and they were all involved in sports. Our boys were diagnosed with ADD, so attention deficit disorder, at a young age. And what that meant was that even though intellectually they were a little bit above average, they struggled with paying attention in class. They struggled with focus. They had a lot of energy that they didn't know what to do with, and they were often getting in trouble, to the point where when each of them were in grade 7 respectively, they started getting into unhealthy decision making. My son Gavin actually started making some changes in his life. Unfortunately, Gavin lost his life. What I didn't know at that time was that the concept of making something from the muddy places in our life. When I was a child, I loved making mud pies. I would sit at the end of my lawn in the ditch or on the curb and gather up all the sand and the grit, add some water, stones, grass, and make these amazing creations. What I didn't know at that time was that the concept of making something from the muddy places in our life, a concept I would use later when I became a parent and I faced many challenges, which inspired the making of an organization called YouthSpeak. My husband and I have a blended family, and what that means is that we have a his, mine, and ours type of deal, and we came together as a family. Now, a blended family has challenges of its own, but for most part, it was a typical family. Our kids were very active, 2 boys, 2 girls, and they were all involved in sports. But our boys were diagnosed with ADD, so attention deficit disorder, at a young age. And what that meant was that even though intellectually they were a little bit above average, they struggled with paying attention in class. They struggled with focus. They had a lot of energy that they didn't know what to do with, and they were often getting in trouble. That can really impact a child's self-esteem and their sense of self-worth. And for them, it most definitely did, to the point where when each of them were in grade 7 respectively, they started getting into unhealthy decision making. They started experimenting with smoking cigarettes, got into the kind of group of friends that weren't making healthy choices, started experimenting with drugs and other things, and that really spiraled throughout high school. My husband and I were scrambling, looking for resources. We were looking for resources for ourselves as parents in helping us deal with all the various emotions we were experiencing of shame, blame, anger, frustration, guilt, sadness, as well as looking for resources for them. And in amongst all the things I found, I was really looking for something that would be impactful. You know, they were at a stage where they needed to hear a really strong message from somebody who had been through some experiences and had made a turnaround. It could really be relatable for them and have an impact. And I just couldn't find anything at that time. I decided to create my own. I really thought it would be meaningful to create a platform where youth share personal stories, youth who have lived experience with a range of issues, share their personal stories, give a voice to those stories to make a difference to somebody else. When they bring in some key messaging around decision making, around asking for help, around discovering their own personal strengths in amongst kind of a messy life. My son Gavin actually started making some changes in his life. He started kind of turning things around a little bit, and I shared with him the idea about YouthSpeak, and he was all over it. Right away he said, "Mom, I want to do that." So him and I had the blessing, the gift, and the joy of being on stage together a couple of times in that first year. Unfortunately, Gavin lost his life in a weather-related car accident on his 19th birthday. That was devastating for us. It was devastating for our kids. It was devastating for all his friends who just loved him. He was such a fun-loving, dynamic person. For my husband and I, we had to very quickly set aside our own grief and our own feelings of loss to be there for our other kids, especially our youngest daughter. Because what was happening at that time when we lost Gavin is our eldest son, Kyle, had moved across the country, running from the law. He came back and turned himself in, so he went to jail. Our eldest daughter was looking at post-secondary school, so she moved out of town and went to university. So for our youngest daughter, it felt to her like she lost all three of her siblings in one go. And that was just too much for her. Through all that she had seen in our home, everything she had been through when we lost Gavin and she lost all her siblings, it was too much. She wanted nothing to do with sadness. She wanted nothing to do with loss and grief. It was overwhelming and too much for her. And she completely shut down those feelings. And that, of course, was very concerning for us, and rightfully so, because within a year's time, she developed an eating disorder. She was hospitalized twice for that eating disorder. And during that process of being hospitalized, she was offered support and help. But once again, it wasn't the kind of help that she needed at that time or that she was even ready for. And she too could turn to negative coping strategies to deal with shutting out those feelings and to deal with the overwhelming loss that she experienced. Those negative coping strategies is what she used throughout high school, which created many more challenges for us as a family, to the point where by the time she was in grade 12, at 17 years old, she became pregnant. During this time also, our son Kyle, who had struggled with bipolar disorder, addiction, and many other challenges, who also was a fun-loving guy and had many friends who loved and supported him. And he managed sometimes in life, but just couldn't manage it anymore. And at age 31, he took his own life. Losing a second child for me was beyond devastating, but it reinforced for me the importance of the work we're doing. It reinforced the importance for me of sharing my story with other parents to help them work through many challenges they might be facing, and it reinforced the message of youth speaking to other youth to help them. Fast forward to today. Our two daughters, our eldest is married and living independently, homeowner, working, and happy in life. Our youngest child is also married in a healthier relationship. They have 2 children now, and she's also in school in the helping field, which is not surprising. But during this period, or as life is today, in a much better place, we still have challenges. There are still muddy places in our life, as there is for everyone. But rather than seeing this as something to get over and something we want to fix, we embrace our whole life. We embrace the muddy places as well as all the joy that we experience, to create as much balance and joy and peace as we can in every day. When I created YouthSpeak 17 years ago, I knew that giving a voice and sharing a personal story would impact others. What I didn't know at the time was how self-healing it would be. And the reason it's self-healing is because giving a meaning to your story creates a sense of purpose in that story. And it helps to change the story we tell ourselves about our story. Because we all know we can't change our past. But when we change the story we tell ourselves about who we are in this world, who we are within our own story, we ultimately can change our future.
Tell us what you think about this video, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.